The surge in knife crime in the capital has brought tragedy to communities across the city, and questions too over who bears the blame for the violence and a culture that is turning young men into killers. Joining me in the studio now is the community activist Stafford Scott. Stafford, good to see you. I mean, just in terms of the way in which this is being reported, a surge in violence in London. I mean, some people are questioning the statistics, but working in the communities you do, are we getting more violent?
It would appear so, that they're getting more violent, using violence more often, and that the outcome of the use of that violence is more tragic and fatal.
Why?
That the police say it's not a crisis. No, it's quite amazing. Why is it happening? Why is it happening is because in 2011, the Prime Minister Cameron and the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, stated that they were starting a war on the gangs. They then had to create those gangs. They said they were starting a war on the gangs because of the gangs' involvement in those summer riots. 4 reviews, including the Metropolitan Police Service's own review, said that there was no evidence of gang orchestration. Cameron and Johnson then went on to help to create those gangs so that we could have the narrative, so that the narrative that they gave us could then appear to have some kind of justification.
When you say that they created the gangs, I mean, what do you mean by that? I mean, clearly there were criminal gangs operating in London before Boris Johnson became Mayor of London.
There have been criminal gangs operating in London since before John Peel set up the police, which is why John Peel set up the police force. There were some groups of young people that we may consider to be gangs. But post the riots, what the government did was redefine what it takes to make a gang. When I was growing up, I heard about the Krays and such. I learned about mobs of people who made up gangs. Today, this government is telling us that 3 youths can be a gang. I have 2 brothers. I come from a place called Tottenham. That means that these people today would define myself and my brothers as being members of a gang. Once you're stereotyped as being a gang and stigmatised, you're just pushed out onto the streets.
But you're clearly not suggesting in any way that, you know, drugs are not linked to the violence that we're seeing in the streets of London.
Let me be absolutely clear. This has nothing to do with drugs whatsoever. Nothing to do with drugs. Right now, there is a war going on in Haringey between young people from Tottenham and young people from Wood Green. That is nothing to do with drugs. It's fueled by the way that they tend to use social media more than it has anything to do with drugs. But ultimately, it comes from the pressure that this state is putting onto these young people. These are children, and the state is using every single agency that it has in its partnership to deliver or not to deliver services, to stereotype, stigmatise and criminalise these young people, and they're acting out as a result of it. It's not acceptable. Those who are personally responsible should be held to account, but the state needs to stop doing what it's doing because it's criminalising our community.
But not everyone who is part of those communities is behaving in this fashion.
Absolutely.
And whilst there are a number of very legitimate historical reasons for the black community in London to be fearful of the police. You know, I come from a part of the world which is no stranger to violent crime, which is no stranger to drug abuse. You know who the dealers are in your community. No. You know who the people with the guns are in your community. You know who the people with the knives are. And I wonder whether or not those people who are saying, look, the police have alienated us, who have acted against us for so long, whether that community is doing all that it can to tackle this type of crime.
What can that community do? One of the things is that what we're seeing at the moment is all of the state agencies coming together and making decisions. They do not engage with us. They don't talk with our communities. You're going to have ministers on after this programme who, if I wait outside for them, are going to phone the police and say I'm harassing them. They'll run away from me rather than engage with me. So they don't talk to our community, so they can't get that understanding.
So you don't think, actually, the significant cut in police numbers that we've seen in the streets, not just of London, but across the country, that cut has not had an effect, has not led to this rise in violence?
Do you really, and the policy makers really think that the kids are sitting at home this morning watching this programme to learn that there's fewer police and then thinking as a result of that we're going to go out there and do something? It doesn't matter the numbers of the police, it's about the pressure that the state, the oppressive state, is putting on these young people that's making them respond in the way that they are.
But what response can there be to the violence that we're seeing? And it is a significant upswing in violent crime. We can say across the board that crime has come down over the past decade, but in terms of violent crime, there are some worrying statistics. What response to that does not involve the police?
The police have a role to play, But this isn't only about policing, and that's the problem. Local authorities, central government, the mayor's office have all reneged on their responsibility to these young people. There's no safeguarding, there's no proper recognition that black kids are the victims as well as being the perpetrators. So all we get is policing, and the only response we get is that kind of response we got from Cressida Dick yesterday, which is we're going to be harder and we're going to put more out there, which is going to cause more response and reaction.
But why then is it wrong for some people, and they have done this, to identify this as black on black crime? That whilst there is this rage and this anger amongst the young disaffected communities that you're talking about, that rage is not being directed against, you know, posh white men, you know, in the streets of London. Instead, it's being directed against their very own, the people that they are most like. Young black men killing other young black men.
They're imploding, Neil. But the problem is that people gave it that tag a long time ago. And that's when they wanted to start to deal with it differently from how they would have dealt with it if it was just people, young people killing young people. Because they identified it as black on black crime, what they've started to do is just bring in punitive responses. In previous years gone by, so when we had the skinheads, for example, the skinheads were committing crime against other white people. They didn't call that white on white crime. They said it was a working class sub-youth culture, and that then meant that we responded to it differently. There's a range of interventions. When they dismissed it as black on black crime, we got an Operation Trident, a unit that is as racist to the core as any racist unit that we've ever seen, and that very same unit now is the gangs unit. And that's why we have this predisposition of just looking at young black kids as gangsters.